and welcome to CATSweek. I'm Annalise Poorman. On April 27th, the Bloomington City Council continued their discussion on raising the local income tax. Councilmember Kate Rosenbarger asked the mayor about how reducing the proposed local income tax rate would affect the budget, if it would affect the budget as a whole or eliminate funding for specific programs.
The more we discuss this and the more questions that are answered, the more I'm on board with the original proposal. I think everything seems really justified, and cutting little bits of each doesn't make sense to me. But I want to ask if cuts are being made, what makes more sense to the administration? Is it, a line item? Is it a percentage across the board? Because, I mean, the way it seems to me, like the East-West Express transit line, it's $1.75 million to get that to go. If we fund, 1.6, do we have an express transit line? I don't know, right? And
Mayor John Hamilton responded.
I agree with your point, Councilmember Rosenbarger, that sometimes we can nip and slice and try to trim a little bit, and can sometimes cut into bone or muscle instead of fat, right? We can have implications in the program that none of us would want to see. I do feel we have been trying to work very hard to identify reductions, and you heard from Mr. Connell that the transit feels they can responsibly support with some of their funds that gap. We asked them, can you give us some room? There's cost to that. There's opportunity cost to that, but we think it's responsible to do it. I do think from our perspective, the difference between kind of where several of you are now and where I think the range, I think people have worked really hard to get pretty close to each other. I believe my view is that passing something close to that's quite important, because if we don't do it, we're in a very bad position.
Councilmember Jim Sims commented that the council has a tough decision to make when so many people want different things. He then shared his preferred funding priorities.
First of all, compromising is essential to arrive at acceptable common ground. I think that's been a common mantra, and particularly for me and some of my colleagues, since I've sat amongst my honorable colleagues all these years. Now, having said that, I've had some folks say zero tax. We don't need it. We don't want it. I've had other folks say we need the full tax. Where are we in there? Where can we arrive at that's acceptable and that will meet some of our future needs? I think it's pretty clear to me. One of the things that I'm looking for is public safety, and particularly the FOP contract and how do we fund that. Essential city services is next. From a priority standpoint, I think you would be naive not to understand that all four buckets have something that is essential and I think needed in this city. We just have to figure out how to get there. Obviously, we can't do everything in every bucket if we also want to reduce the amount of the tax. So that's where we are, or where I am. I appreciate innovation and some of the things that I've heard, and particularly in housing and some of the ideas we have on the table. One of the things I'd like to hear, and we have some very good programs, and I'd like to see them become more robust. For an example, and we'll talk more about this next week or in a comments, but for an example, the home buyers class. I mean, that is a good program. And some of the funding that we're talking about this evening can be used to be part of that to help with down payments, and particularly in home ownership. Yeah, there's missing housing and there's all that, but one of the darts in this community is home ownership.
The council will vote on the local income tax at their next meeting on May 4th. At the Monroe County Commissioners meeting on April 27th, Sheriff Brad Swain updated the commissioners on how his office has been implementing Lexipol software to keep track of their policy documents and procedure manuals.
One of the issues that we had when I took office was we had separate policies and procedures updated or implemented by different sheriffs, and they were in different formats. Some were just printed materials, scanned. Others were created on Word documents. So it was just a mishmash of policies and procedures. You actually, we had trouble finding them. If an employee needed to make a reference, that was difficult. With Lexipol, we now have a searchable database by word search for any policy or procedure. And these are even accessible by telephone, by an app on the phone, or by in-car computers. And just doing a search term, a deputy or a jail officer can find a policy or procedure at a moment's notice. In addition to this program and implementing it, we found that we had a lot of policies that were not really that were lacking and needed updating.
Swain said they have also been using the program to send out training bulletins.
So we created, or had Lexipol create a daily training bulletin. They didn't have one yet. And when I contacted them, they thought that was a good idea. They sent it out to every single Lexipol customer they had. It also provides good tracking, especially now that we have well over 100 jail and patrol officers. It provides tracking that they are reviewing and they are taking the daily training bulletins. And we don't do this every single day. We set out a few subject matter training bulletins, and within their work rotation in a given month, they are supposed to take the time, review, and document. And there's tracking on that.
Swain said that Lexipol has been a beneficial program for the Sheriff's Department. The next commissioners' meeting will be held on May 2nd. And we'll have more Cats Week after this message.
I'm at risk of thinking there's just no point in trying. I'm at risk of looking in the mirror and hating what I see.
I'm at risk of regretting what I do, just to join the crowd.
I'm at risk of being told not to tell. And you would never know it by looking at me.
But with Girls Inc. in my corner,
There for me every day. Believing in me.
Showing me what's possible.
I can be strong enough
to respect myself and my body, to say I can rather than I can't,
To say no with no apology.
to be a leader.
to finish school,
To own my future.
To break the cycle.
Girls Inc. believes every girl can succeed. That's why the trained professionals of Girls Inc. are there for our girls every day, supporting, mentoring, and guiding them in a safe, girls-only environment. Building bonds that last for years and change that lasts a lifetime. Girls Inc. gives girls the tools they need to boldly face challenges, to resist peer pressure, to be the first in their families to go to college, to beat the odds. With Girls Inc. in her corner, every girl can be healthy, confident, and resilient. She'll do more than dream about her potential. She'll reach it.
With you in my corner,
With you in my corner, I will not be another statistic.
I will fight for myself.
For my future.
With you in my corner, I will win.
Fuel her fire and she will change the world. Girls Inc. Inspiring all girls to be strong, smart, and bold.
Welcome back to CATSweek. On April 26th, at the Bloomington Board of Park Commissioners meeting, Director Paula McDevitt asked the board to approve the suspension of a park visitor. City Attorney Michael Ruker gave the commissioners background information on their ability to issue a temporary park suspension and explained why one has been submitted for resident Matthew Mulligan.
From time to time, when a member of the public violates parks rules, the parks director issues an order temporarily suspending the violator from using any parks facilities. This is called a temporary park suspension, and these suspensions are issued in accordance with rules promulgated by this board. Unfortunately, the director of the Parks Department, Director McDevitt, had to issue a temporary suspension earlier this month to Matthew Mulligan following incidents at the Ferguson Dog Park. In your packet, you'll find relevant information, including an incident report, as she mentioned, a sworn affidavit from Clark Delisle, one of Mr. Mulligan's targets, so you'll find that information. Mr. Delisle, along with Detective Rob Shrake from the Bloomington Police Department, are present virtually today in the event the board has questions for them following the presentation by each of the parties here. Detective Rob Shrake was the detective who investigated the incidents. Mr. Delisle's affidavit describes the incidents that gave rise to the suspension order issued by Director McDevitt. First, on March 21st, 2022, as Mr. Delisle was exiting the dog park and getting his dog to his vehicle, his dog was loose and began running up and down the park fence opposite Mr. Mulligan's dogs. Mr. Mulligan accosted Mr. Delisle and verbally berated him while his dogs were running. Mr. Mulligan filmed Mr. Delisle and took down Mr. Delisle's license plate number and followed Mr. Delisle into the parking lot yelling at him. While this incident must have been jarring, Mr. Delisle did not contact law enforcement on March 21st. However, just a couple of weeks later, when Mr. Delisle again visited the dog park, Mr. Mulligan showed up. On April 6th, 2022, as Mr. Delisle was trying to leave the dog park, Mr. Mulligan pulled his vehicle up behind Mr. Delisle and physically blocked him from exiting. As before, Mr. Mulligan used loud, threatening language towards Mr. Delisle. This harassment, particularly combined with a previous incident, was concerning enough that Mr. Delisle contacted law enforcement and an investigation was initiated by Detective Shrake. The very same day, on April 6th, Director McDevitt issued an order suspending Mr. Mulligan from all parks facilities for 90 days.
Mulligan spoke in his own defense against the suspension.
On 3/22, I was accused of verbally berating a gentleman whose dog was loose outside the fence and running up and down the fence. My dogs loved it. His dog was out of control. And I simply said to him, this is why we leash our dogs in and out of the fence. The park's utilized by so many different people, so many different levels of dog training. I always keep my dogs leashed to and from the park. And here was a situation where this dog was wild and did run the full length of the fence, untethered. And I made a mention of it, and he took exception to it. And I told him that his dog was out of control, simply, obviously.
Okay, all right. Are there any questions for Mr. Mulligan or?
The second part with this April 6th leaving, pulled the vehicle in, threatening, I would like the evidence because a police officer came to my house that day and had no evidence and then called me. The police came because I think I spoke with you at the park. Were you the park officer, animal control, that we had a chat? I gave her my name. 2 days later, I came to the park, and that's when the Shrake or Broke, the policeman, The policeman called me and said, I followed these individuals home, that I took a different route, which to me sounds like they're stalking me. Well, how do they know what route I take home? I live like 0.6 of a mile from the park, just right above the park. So my point is this. I get a call from a policeman that says, I've harassed somebody, and then he's going to come and swore out a warrant at downtown to have me arrested over intimidation. Where is the picture? Where is the evidence that they said they had photographic evidence of me following them? I never did. It's untrue. It's piling on, and it's unfair. And it's unsubstantiated, and I'd like to talk to the cop.
Board member Jim Whitlatch asked Mulligan if he was at the park that day and if he did in fact pull in front of Delilah's car, intending to block his vehicle from exiting the parking lot. Mulligan said he did not do it.
And I did not do this, and I appeal for my dogs because it's so unfair that they're not able to go to dog park. We can go at a different time. We can go alternate days, but the animals enjoy the park so much. I've been a responsible park patron. I pick up my poop. The lady that I said, hey, you wouldn't have such a fat ass if you went after your dog and picked up your poop, well, I apologize to her. But sitting there reading a book while your dog poop, I don't think, I'm kind of a person who thinks, I mean, I walk in the park, the first thing I do is I walk to the end of the park because I know right where my dog's gonna go. And I just feel like all of us need to contribute to our park.
City Attorney Ruker and Councilmember Whitlatch asked Clark Delilah a series of questions about his encounters with Mulligan.
Clark, I just want to ask you really quickly, on April 6th, 2022, as mentioned in your sworn statement, were you at the Ferguson Dog Park?
Yeah, I was.
Did you see Mr. Mulligan at the park on April 6th, 2022?
Yes, I did.
Did he physically block your vehicle from exiting the dog park on April 6th, 2022?
He pulled in and parked behind my girlfriend's car, yes.
That's all I have.
Did he complain about out-of-state licenses during that encounter?
Yes, he did.
And that was, there's no doubt in your mind that that was him on that date?
I see the same man in the same car every morning. I really don't have any doubt.
And did he get out of the car or did he stay in the car?
On that occasion, no. He pulled in, we were heading to leave, and he rolled his window down and said something about our out-of-state plates and that he had a friend that was a police officer that was going to come somehow punish us for having an out-of-state plate, and then he sped off. But he didn't exit the vehicle, no.
The board unanimously approved the suspension of Mulligan from city parks for 90 days. At the Bloomington Board of Public Works meeting on April 26th, the board heard from Engineering Public Improvement Manager Emily Herr about accepting East Short Street into the city's inventory.
An MOU between Laurenwood Builders and the City of Bloomington Department of Public Works was approved on April 16, 2019 to connect East Short Street between South Maxwell Street and South Highland Avenue. The public improvements, including the paved road, crosswalks, sidewalks, curb ramps, detectable warning elements, signage, trees, and pavement markings, were inspected and found to be acceptable by staff. The Board of Public Works approves the acceptance of public improvements, authorizing the release of the performance bond 30 days after final acceptance and the acceptance of the maintenance bond of $10,000. Staff recommends the acceptance of these public improvements associated with the Short Street extension, release of the performance bond, and acceptance of the maintenance bond, which will remain in effect for 2 years after acceptance. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
The addition was approved unanimously. The next Public Works meeting will be held on May 10th. And we'll have more CATSweek after this message.
For hurting families in Monroe County.
A contribution to children who are vulnerable and in need of an advocate.
A staff that goes above and beyond to support and advocate for children in need of services.
The web of remarkable people who are dealing with difficult situations.
So many young people that are in need of help and trying to find a stable family, a stable place to live. without the CASAs to make that happen, many of them would be unable to find a good home.
I love being that voice for the child who can't speak for themselves in court.
It takes me out of my comfort zone, and it also helps others.
CASA means supporting our community.
Being a CASA is making sure that your village is healthy and whole, and that the children in your village will someday be able to help the village as well.
A child who doesn't have a voice, maybe in their family situation or a school situation, now has a voice that can advocate for them.
I really enjoy working with children that are going through difficult times and letting them know that I care about their future.
We are privileged with our charge of representing the best interest of children. And so therefore we can advocate for exactly what they need without restriction, focusing on their best interest.
I want to repair the world one child at a time.
Welcome back to CATSweek. At the Ellettsville Town Council meeting on April 25th, the council decided between two bids they received for help updating the town's personnel policy. Treasurer Sandra Hash recommended that the council approve a contract with New Focus. Hash said their bid was less expensive and that their references had positive things to say.
The two quotes are from New Focus and then the Wagner that did our wage study. And I have talked to Greencastle and Decatur. They're both very pleased with New Focus. They said that they do annual updates to keep them in compliance. They also have assisted with job descriptions and salary ordinances and salary surveys. And even they had a personnel issue. They were able to reach out because you can pay for HR service with them by the hour, and they assisted them with that. So both of them were very good references for the New Focus. I did reach out to Monroe County, who uses Wagner, and they have actually not had them update their policy since 2008. Now they did it, and then the county maintains that because they have staff attorneys, so they maintain it themselves. They have re-contracted with them for another wage study, but I've looked through both policies, and comparatively, I mean, they're both getting, you know, the legal information in there that we need. They're updating our fair labor standards, make sure that we have something in there about lactation for mommies that need that, because we don't have anything in our policy. We have to provide a place for that to happen. So at any rate, that was just one that stuck out in my mind when I ran across it. I think they're comparable, and so my suggestion for 1/3 the price is to go with New Focus.
Councilmember Scott Oldham said that he was in favor of her recommendation.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'd prefer to go with the group that we did not have do the wage study, which is the alternative that she's suggesting.
I think that's a good check.
Just because we have a check and balance, exactly. You ready for a motion?
Yep, and let's make a motion.
Okay, Sandy, what's the name of this group again? Apologies.
New Focus.
I would move that we hire New Focus to complete the update for our personnel policy.
The council approved the contract unanimously. Later, Town Marshal and Chief of Police Jimmy Durnall introduced their candidate, George Robinson, for the position of Assistant Chief Deputy.
Our candidate was born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky. He attended DuPont Manual High School. He came to Bloomington to go to school here as an IUPD officer in the late 60s, early 70s, went back, returned to Louisville, and joined the Louisville Police Department and did retire there as a detective in the department. He came back to Bloomington in 1996 with the IUPD as a sergeant in 1996, and then again he retired from IUPD in 2016 as an operations lieutenant. He's just been waiting for another chance to serve the residents of Indiana. But I want to present to you tonight George F. Robinson, and would submit to you he'd be approved for the Ellettsville PD Assistant Chief. George, you want to come forward?
The council approved the appointment of George Robinson unanimously. He was sworn in by Hash directly following the vote.
I, George F. Robinson III,
I, George F. Robinson III,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Indiana,
the Constitution of the State of Indiana,
and the Town Code of Ellettsville,
and the Town Code of Ellettsville,
and that I will faithfully, impartially, and diligently discharge and perform my duties as Chief Deputy Marshal I'm sorry, of the Ellettsville Police Department, Ellettsville, Indiana, according to the law, and to the best of my skill and ability, so help me God. Thank you, and I need your signature.
On April 25th, at the Bloomington Utilities Service Board meeting, Capital Projects Manager Daniel Hudson shared bids for the Monroe Water Treatment Plant Filter Rehabilitation Project.
With the media replacement, it also includes structural repairs of the ceiling, lighting replacement, and some electrical improvements. And a big part of it is ventilation of the filters. We have two bids that came in. The first one is Mitchell and Stark.
According to Hudson, the bid from Michelin Stark is for $3,256,845. The bid from Building Associates is for $2,304,700. Board member Kirk White asked how much the department originally expected the project to cost. Hudson said that their estimates were much smaller than the bids they received.
Departmental estimate and the consulting engineering estimate were the same. It's $1,281,100.
Yeah, I was thinking, wow. So
considerable difference.
Kind of reflects the situation we're in, I guess, at the moment.
That's what I suspect. I mean, all of the contractors are talking about delays and uncertainty in projects because of equipment delays in manufacturing. So I'm hoping that's the issue. I don't know.
Hudson said that the department staff will bring their recommendation to the next board meeting in 2 weeks. And that is all for CATSweek. Thank you for joining us. For CATS and WFHB, I'm Annalise Poorman.